Welcome to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you another video, and today we're going to be continuing the What If Deku Was a Power Ranger series, Heroes of the Morphing Grid Part 9. Before we get into today's video, as always, I want to thank everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. Cannot do it without you. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions in Podcastings. Without further ado, we're going to get into today's video. Don't really want to keep you guys waiting too long. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Even with the defeat of All for One, the Rangers' battle was far from over, as Rita Repulsa had gone back to the interdimensional gap, arriving back to the throne of Lord Draken in failure. Her intolerance would not be treated kindly for much longer, as she would suffer the full wrath of the Dragon Ranger. Being destroyed and wiped away into nothing, Lord Draken had gone tired of the antics that had been growing around him. Not just from this new team of Rangers, but it was also another series of events. Hunting down Rangers was like hunting down rats that never seemed to want to go down with the ship. Powers were popping up in other dimensions where Power Rangers didn't even exist. The armada that he had sent after Jason and the Zeo Ranger powers had not sent any word back to him. From what he could gather from the reports, they had gone through some sort of wormhole and they were in an alternate universe. No telling when they would be back. There were also the Jungle Fury powers, which had somehow jumped and made its way to another universe altogether, with strong and powerful foes, known as curses. It seemed to be that the powers were appearing in places where they shouldn't belong, and it was starting to become a growing problem. Lord Draken knew that if he didn't nip it in the bud as soon as possible, he could be facing forces that would be too great for even he himself to deal with. But what was Lord Draken's goal? What was he trying to accomplish? The answer was rather simple. The Morphing Grid was a mystery, one that many cannot fully understand or fathom. If he could somehow figure out how to tap into the power, tap into it to its truest extent, then he could rise above any being. The Morphing Grid was an unexplainable, unimaginable source of power, and the less people that drew from it, the better. Conceding all of that power into one being, it would make him the ultimate fighting force in the universe, one that could never be challenged. As such, he worked to exterminate the Rangers across the multiverse at all purpose. However, his progress had been halted at many turns, and now even more so he were recovering from his latest battle. However, he had not forgotten. While his plans would be put on hold at the time, soon he would be back to full strength. And when he was going to do away with the Rangers once and for all. In the meantime, Deku and the others were adjusting to their new life in the dorms. However, even more so, Deku would be in a rather confused state, to say the least. He wasn't sure of how to feel about All Might's retirement. A part of him even blamed himself, believing that if he could have been better, if he could have been stronger, then maybe All Might wouldn't have had to give up One for All. Although, looking at how things had gone from the time that he had met All Might up until now, the fact that All Might hadn't been pushed to his limits to the point where he could have died truly did say a lot. As Deku was in his room, thinking of many things to himself, he would get a knock on the door as he would be greeted by All Might, who would call him to the secret power chamber in the middle of the campus, where the other Rangers would be gathered together as well. Melissa would be there also, as she and Alpha had been working on some of the data for the Zords. Mr. Aizawa and Principal Nezu were also present. Melissa's father had to go back to Island as there was much work that needed to be done, and while he wanted to, he just couldn't afford to stay in Japan. However, he did promise that he would visit whenever he could, and if they ever needed any of his assistance, then he was only but a call away. With all the Rangers now gathered together, All Might would make his announcement. He would tell the Rangers that he was stepping down officially as the #1 hero. Of course, they had already known about this for some time, but he was telling them this because they were the only students who were aware of the secrets of his power, that being one for all. Of course, for many of them, they had often wondered who exactly he was going to choose as his successor, and some had even flirted with the idea of being chosen themselves, although they didn't think it would be likely since they were all Power Rangers. As they were all gathered together, All Might would stand in front of them as he would say that he had finally chosen one person who he felt could take on the power. As he combed the room, his eyes coming across Melissa, Bakugo, Ida, Yaoyorozu, Uraraka, Todoroki, they would ultimately fall upon Deku, as he would come face to face with him, looking him in the eyes and telling him that he was the one that he had chosen. For many in the room, they were a bit shocked. They had learned about Deku's situation and how he had only recently gotten a quirk well over 6 months ago to a year. It was mainly due to the effects of the Morphing grid, allowing him to unlock the recessive quirk gene within his body that gave him the ability to harness the green flames. A good moniker, as his ranger animal was based off of that of the dragon. However, even still, they would have assumed that someone like Bakugo or Todoroki would have most likely have been chosen. But for it to be Deku, of all people. While some were shocked, many did understand and were actually pretty happy for Deku. After all, he was the one who had looked up to All Might way more than anyone else among them. While they all did have their own admiration for the hero, it was obvious that when it came to Deku was almost second to none, even to Bakugo. All Might would explain that he wasn't choosing any one person because he didn't think that the others couldn't be worthy, but in fact that they were all righteous and noble heroes. But it was that through his own observations, he had decided that it would be best to give it to Deku. Of course, there would be one scoff in the room, from none other than Bakugo. Bakugo would stand proudly and remark that he didn't see what made Deku all so special, although even he had to admit deep down within himself that he understood the reason for the choice. However, even still, before the power was to be passed down, Bakugo had one request. The others would hear him out as he would point to Deku, telling him that he wanted to have a full-on battle, the two of them going all out with everything they had right now. He wanted to know where he stood to the next successor to the #1 hero, to see where he truly matched up in the grand scheme of things. Of course, Mr. Aizawa wasn't fully on board with the idea of them fighting one another. Although if they were to go all out, it would definitely be better than the two of them fighting when they weren't supervised. However, Bakugo wouldn't relent, stating that he wouldn't accept Deku being the next successor if he didn't get this opportunity. This wasn't about being a hero or anything along those lines. This was about Bakugo wanting to test himself against Deku, once and for all. The Green Ranger versus the Red Ranger. Alpha would begin to shake a bit in the room as memories would begin to flood back to him, remembering how there was once a rivalry such as this between Jason and Tommy. It seemed as though no matter what the universe or what the era, the fiery spirit of competition never truly died. Of course, All Might wanted to object, but Deku would stand firm in his resolve, telling him that he wanted this fight also. He looked to the teachers and asked if they could please give them an arena for the two of them to fight and go all out, to truly put everything on the line. Even so, Deku wanted to see himself. How far had he come since he began his journey as a ranger and as a hero? Was he truly worthy enough to stand and be the next successor to All Might? He would never know if he didn't try now. After some pestering, Principal Nezu would relent, stating that there was a special training area where the two of them could be allowed to battle with their ranger powers and go all out. Of course, Zords would be off limits as they weren't trying to create any mass destruction, and Bakugo and Deku would agree to this. With the date now set, everyone would now be a bit anxious as to what was to come. Of course, even for among the students of Class 1A, not everyone was truly familiar with what the Ranger powers were. They just assumed that Deku and the others just worked with a special agency that made suits just like theirs for some reason, although why they were all coordinated they had no idea. There were so many questions coming out of the incident involving All Might against All for One. Many questions that needed to be answered. Even among the public, they were wondering who these students were. Who were the Power Rangers and what were these powers? Where had they come from? Were they going to be the next great crop of heroes? There were so many questions swirling around, not just in Japan, but all around the world. The name of the Power Rangers were slowly starting to grow fame, not just in the world above, but in the criminal underground below. Among them, none other than Shigaraki. He too were interested in the Power Rangers. However, his main gripe would be in destroying the ones who aided All Might in defeating his master. Even though Rita was gone, she had given him something. It was from that staff that she had carried around with her. It was a weird object. She said it was a morpher, although the morpher didn't connect itself to the morphing grid at the moment. It could be of some use if he could combine it with some other technology. Maybe he could make something for himself, although what he would want to make, she had no idea. Shigaraki had his top scientists getting to work on the morpher right away, to unlock any of the information that it might have, and to see if it could provide them any power in their fight against the heroes. Soon the time would come and Deku and Bakugo would come face to face, the two squaring off in what might be one of the most epic battles ever to be seen. There would be a flash of green and of red, as Deku blazing with the green flames, and Bakugo with his fiery red explosions. The two heroes would go to blows, their fight shooting sparks of heat and explosion all across the battlefield. Sparks of green and of red, flashing as the two of them would engage in combat. Bakugo using his explosive power sword, Deku with his flaming dragon dagger, the blades colliding with one another over and over again. It was clear to see that Deku had made much progress in his time at UA, even amongst the other teachers and staff who were watching as well. The only students who would be present would be all of the other Rangers, and even still, they were a bit worried. Of course, they didn't think that Bakugo and Deku truly hated one another, but that they were simply fierce rivals. However, all the same, it wasn't easy watching your friends fight one another so ferociously. It got to a point where the hits started to land a bit harder. The explosions started to get a bit more deadlier, and the fire started to rage a bit more hotter. Deku had taken to using more of a shoot style when it came to his fighting, his feet usually being adorned with the fiery kicks, accompanied by a fiery punch as well, Bakugo being able to counter with his explosions also. As the fight dragged on, it would eventually reach its ultimate climax with the two of them hovering in the sky, Deku believing that he could simply drive Bakugo into the ground. Their suits had been ripped to shreds and their visors had been nearly cracked. The teachers were getting worried and they wanted to step in to stop it, but All Might would hold them back, as he knew that this had to end. If they were going to be proper heroes, then they had to leave it all out on the line now. In a final desperate explosion, Bakugo would reverse one of Deku's emerald flames, reversing the trajectory of the attack as he would slam Deku into the ground, creating a massive crater. Even with the benefit of the dragon's shield, Deku would lay in a heap of pain. As they would both demorph, Bakugo holding Deku by the arm, his foot on his face, and another explosion ready to go. The teachers would rush to stop it immediately, as it was clear that Bakugo had won. Eventually they would be pulled apart, as All Might would applaud them for such a fierce battle. As Deku would slowly get up, Bakugo would remark that he could see truly just where they were in terms of power. He could see that even despite all the improvements that Deku had, he still held the slight edge when it came to overall strength. And that was a good starting point. They both knew where they were and they knew where they wanted to go. Bakugo would look back to Deku, telling him that even if he took All Might's power, that he was still going to be the #1 ranger amongst them all, and that he had his own goals that he wished to set, that he would become the strongest ranger, and then and only then would he make his own name out in the world as the #1 hero, the Red Explosive Ranger. Deku would also stand in his resolve, noting that he planned to get strong also. He would learn to harness the powers of One for All, and that he too would aspire to be the #1 hero. All Might would congratulate the both of them on a job well done, telling them that he were proud of the way that they had fought, and that he couldn't think of better people to be heroes. From there, Deku would be given One for All, although the process wasn't what he was expecting, as it required him to eat one of All Might's hairs, something that the other Rangers, even Bakugo, would laugh at him for constantly. On top of preparing for the provisional license exam, Deku would also get to work on his training to try to hone One for All, with Gran Torino and All Might overseeing his training. Leading up to the provisional license, Class 1A would also get a chance to meet the upperclassmen of their alma mater as well, meeting the top 3 students who were the third year, otherwise known as the Big Three. They were Mirio Togata, Nejire Hado, and Tamaki Amajiki. The 3 of them all being unique with their own personalities. Tamaki being rather shy and reserved, Nejire being explosive and full of life, and Miro being unique and stylish in his own way. Mirio wanted to see what these first years were capable of, and asked for a chance to spar against them. Of course, they were surprised to see just how powerful his quirk was, and even more so at how versatile he was at using it. Even the other Rangers were surprised at what he could do, although for this spar, they weren't allowed to use their morphers. Although even if they had, the chances that they would have landed a hit were easier said than done. Although Deku and Bakugo proved to be pretty surprising. In fact, even with their teamwork, they were able to get in some solid blows, all working together of course. Although ultimately, Miro would prove to just be too overwhelming of a force. showing that even without All for One, there were still a lot more powerful beings out there to face. What was even more surprising was learning that someone like him could potentially have gotten One for All. That sent shivers down their spines, especially Deku. Even with his training, and thankfully due to all the work that he had put in, using One for All didn't truly wreck his body, although he was only at a point where he could only use a small percentage of the power, at most around 12 or 13%. And this was a massive improvement, as if it wasn't for all the training that he had put in up until now, he might have been stuck in a situation where he could only use 1 or maybe even 2% of his power. But to be able to use 12 to 13% right off the bat was truly astounding. Although even still, there was still much work that needed to be done. Eventually, Class 1A would go to take the provisional license exam, and from here the story would virtually remain the same. Even with Ranger powers, Bakugo and Todoroki would still end up failing and needing to take remedial classes. Melissa was a special case. She was technically the age to be a third year, and she had gotten her education from Island. Transferring her credits over to UA, she basically took classes along with the third years, although whenever she had hero training, she would basically train with Class 1A, especially being that she were one of the Rangers. Although she was getting special private training from a few of the other pros from one-on-one practice, learning how to control her own new quirk, elasticity, something that could be rather useful and resourceful, although it did make her body pretty much like rubber. Within time though, new forces were starting to gather within Japan, none more so than the ones known as the Chie Hassaikai. Their leader, Chisaki, otherwise known as Overhaul, would come face to face with the leader of the League of Villains, Tomura Shigaraki. The initial interaction proved to be a bit deadly, resulting in the death of Big Mag, as well as Mr. Compress losing one of his arms. However, the bird-masked Yakuza had come with a proposal. It was obvious that the League of Villains were growing rather popular amongst the world, and even more so, that a much more deadlier force was starting to come onto the horizon, that being known as the Power Rangers. It wasn't lost on them that the Rangers were definitely going to be a group of heroes who could be a threat in the future, but that even still, if they worked together now, maybe they could nip it in the bud, snuffing out those flames before they become infernos. This did intrigue Shigaraki. However, he would need to learn more about Overhaul and his plans, and what exactly did he plan to do to bring down Hero Society. From here, the two of them would talk and converse, as they would discuss the future of their partnership between the Chie Hassaikai and the League of Villains. Following the provisional license exam, Class 1A, and for all those who had passed, would be given the opportunity to do work studies with other hero agencies. Deku wanted to get a chance to truly learn and expand his horizons, as he had now gotten a bit closer to the older student known as Miro. He had asked if he could be a part of his agency, the one headed by none other than Sir Night-Eye, the former sidekick to none other than All Might. Mirio was a bit weary, as he knew what type of person Sir Night-Eye could be, but even still, he decided to give Deku a chance and would invite him over to the agency, although it would prove to be a bit more than what Deku was expecting, as the first thing they would see as they entered the room was one of Sir Night-Eye's agency heroes, that being Bubble Girl, being strapped to a tickle machine and being tickled by multiple feathers, truly showing that Sir Night-Eye was definitely one to have a good laugh. As Deku would meet with Sir Night-Eye, the two of them would shake hands. Sir Night-Eye would make it very clear that in his eyes, Mirio would have been the better choice. However, his reasoning was a bit different than what Deku was expecting. He explained that Deku were already fine enough of a hero as a Power Ranger, and he believed that the power would have been better used on someone like Mirio. That was just his personal preference. Though he would thank Deku for helping his sensei and partner in his final battle against All for One. However, he wasn't prepared to just let him join so easily. As Deku got a chance to look around the room, he could see much of All Might memorabilia everywhere. Some of the most rarest of artifacts and prizes of All Might's historic hero career were everywhere. If Deku hadn't known better, he thought he would have died and gone to heaven. Sir Night-Eye would then ask if he could make him laugh. And this would put Deku on the spot more than anything, as he wasn't entirely sure of how he could do so. However, he would come up with one idea, posing his face into that of All Might. Although Sir Night-Eye would take a closer look at Deku's impersonation, feeling as though he were making a mockery, as he could see that the eyes and the mouth and some of the shading and the wrinkles were slightly off, as if they were a bit scrawny, as if he had been in salt water or something bitter, wondering if Deku were even trying or if he were just trying to make a joke of his sensei. However, Deku would explain that he had indeed copied All Might, and that his impersonation was actually inspired by the vinegar incident that happened a long time ago, where All Might had saved a young boy, but the young boy's quirk, as he had fell in the water, had turned it into vinegar, and All Might got vinegar all in his eyes, thus causing the wrinkles and the slight differences of appearance. Sir Night-Eye, recognizing this and seeing as how he had made an error, he would apologize before taking over and signing Deku's paper, before telling him the rules and what he needed to know, as he would leave him to it. Before leaving though, Deku would ask why he didn't even give him a chance to grab the stamp. Sir Night-Eye, without turning, would simply say, "I don't have a counter for giant robots." As he would leave, Mirio would ask what he meant by that, and Deku would explain to him a little bit about the Zords. Mirio would be completely surprised that Deku had something like that to work with, although now that he had mentioned it, Deku would then have a much shocked face as he looked, realizing that for him to say that, it meant that Deku might have gone as far as to call his Dragon Zord. Although he had hoped that he wouldn't have to do anything like that, since he wouldn't want to destroy any of the memorabilia. He wondered what would have pushed him to go that far. Although now, they'd never really know. As Deku got used to his time in the agency, his friends were getting along in their own ways as well. Kirishima had gone to work with Fat Gum along with Tamaki, and Uraraka and Sue had gone to work with Ryukuo agencies. And for the most part, their work studies has been going rather well. Although Kirishima did have an incident where he had to fight a villain, someone who had a quirk-enhancing drug, as well as quirk-erasing bullets. Although how villains were able to get their hands on that sort of thing, they had no idea. Although they did make sure to keep Sir Night-Eye informed. As Deku and Mirio would be on patrol, Deku wearing his ranger uniform, as this was his de facto hero costume, the helmet blocking his secret identity, making it easy for no one to detect or realize who he was. As they were walking down the street, they would be coming across the alleyway when a young girl would immediately run out and bump into them. Deku would help the young girl up, seeing as she were in rather tattered clothing, nothing that a young child should be wearing, and that her legs and arms were bandaged as if they had been injured rather recently. And you could see a peculiar horn on her head. As the young girl looked up to them in fear and in desperation, they would hear a rather calm voice coming from the other end of the alley. As they turned back, they would see none other than the leader of the MHA Hisaikai, someone they had been warned about by Sir Night-Eye, as the leader of the Yakuza, Chisaki. However, since they hadn't blown their cover, Mirio tried to play it off and act as if everything were fine, explaining that it was just an accident. Chisaki would explain that his daughter could be a bit clumsy and she were always bumping into things. However, as Deku held the young girl, he could see that there was much fear in her eyes. He could tell that there was something wrong here, although he couldn't quite figure out what it was. Chisaki would then ask if Eri would please come back, and Mirio would help get the young girl back to him, although she would cling on to him desperately, begging him not to let her go. Deku for a moment didn't want to. However, Mirio would tell him that there was no reason for them to try to be in his way, as it was obvious that it was just a misunderstanding, as Mirio mainly worked on trying to keep up appearances, giving off the impression that they were just rookie heroes, although for Deku it was far from it. A few people who they had seen on patrol had recognized him and even asked for autographs. Even if Mirio wasn't all that known yet as Lemillion, it was obvious that the Green Ranger was. Reluctantly, he would let Eri go back to the man, as the two of them would walk back down the alleyway, the young girl looking back to Deku one more time. The two heroes would then make their way back to Sir Night-Eye's agency, telling him everything that happened. Sir Night-Eye would then look using foresight into their futures to see if he could gain any information, before thanking them and telling them that they had done the right thing. Although for Deku, he didn't really feel that way. He felt as though there was something that he should have done, but he didn't. And it was just something that he would keep to himself. Even in school and during his training, his friends and some of the teachers could see that there was something bothering him. The other Rangers in particular would ask if there were anything wrong, but Deku would say that it was nothing to worry about, and he would simply keep it to himself as best he could. Not too long after, one day, Deku would get a call to head in for his work studies, to head to Sir Night-Eye's. However, as he was making his way to the location, he would also be tagged along by Kirishima, Sue, and Uraraka. Eventually, it became obvious that everyone was heading in the same direction, although why were they all heading to Sir Night-Eye's? They really couldn't tell. Eventually, they would make their way inside before heading to a private conference room. Inside would be Sir Night-Eye along with a few other heroes, as well as the big three. Miss Ryuko, as well as Fat Gum, would be there in attendance as well. Even Mr. Aizawa had arrived. And the last person that Deku was expecting to see would be none other than Gran Torino, as he thought Gran Torino would be off on something else. And for the most part he was, as he was helping investigate the League of Villains, but he was stopping to give in some information before he left for his next assignment. As everyone would settle down, Sir Night-Eye would begin the conference, explaining to them that up until now, he had been working with other agencies to get help in a case that he had been working on. This case was against the MHA Hisaikai and their leader, Chisaki, aka Overhaul. They had gathered the evidence together to show that they had been involved in illegal quirk-enhancing drugs, as well as in production of a weapon known as quirky racing bullets. Tamaki and Kirishima giving their input as to what had happened when they had come across the would-be thug who were using both. It was now starting to make sense that the Yakuza were in all likelihood planning on making a comeback, now with enhanced quirk criminals, and it was even said that they were closely associating themselves with the League of Villains, thus the reason for Gran Torino's presence, as well as the police. However, more horrifying news would be revealed, as Sir Night-Eye had personally uncovered a much more gruesome scenario. That the reason for the production of the quirky racing bullets was more than likely due to one thing. Chie Hisaikai had been conducting inhumane experiments, as everyone would look on to wonder just what exactly they could be. Sir Night-Eye would explain that in all likelihood, they were using someone's blood in order to make the quirky racing bullets, as it contained traces of human DNA. However, this human was someone who was suffering more than anyone else and more than anything than they could ever imagine. Deku and Mirio would feel the color drain from their faces as Sir Night-Eye would announce the name of the victim. It was none other than the girl that they had met in the alleyway. The girl that had been in Deku's arms. The girl that he could have saved, but instead did nothing at all. Chisuke was making quirky racing bullets from the blood of his own daughter, Eri. This concludes What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Heroes of the Morphing Grid, Part 9. For all this and more, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings, as we are on the road to 2K and beyond. But as always, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.